So we're continuing in chapter 2, Prajna, and we're in the middle of page 26. So the master began this chapter addressing the assembly that had gathered, and we're guessing this is probably the second major teaching, but we don't know if these are, because there's no dates and there's no timing of when this happens. But in terms of the themes, he started this one by essentially saying that everything is whole and complete within. Attend to this and you will straightaway attain this awakening. And now he started this chapter or this section telling them to clear their minds, to really calm their minds and focus their attention on what he's going to be talking about here. You could say it's focusing their attention on what he's going to be talking about, but he's also saying focus their attention on this innate wisdom they have. And he says the great perfection of wisdom, which in the Sanskrit is Maha Prajna Paromita, that was on page 23. So he's gone on to explain a little bit about Prajna, and we've been into that. And then he goes on to talk about the Maha. And the Maha he's talking about isn't so much the greatness of the abstract notion of wisdom, but the greatness of the human capacity for that. So when he says the Maha, the great, means our mind is meant for these great and all-encompassing qualities. And so the wisdom is innate, and the Maha is talking about the human capacity for this. And now on this page, he's going to take the third aspect of that, which is Paromita. So he goes Maha, Prajna, Paromita. The Paromita is the focus here. And that's where we start. On page 26, he says, and we're reading from the text, what does Paromita mean? He said this is a Sanskrit word. In Chinese, it means arriving at the other shore. It means that one is no longer bound by birth and death. If one clings to the sensory realms, birth and death arise like water arising on water, like waves arise on water. And this is called this shore. If you do not cling to the sensory states, there is no birth and death, just like freely flowing water, and this is went by the other shore, so it is called Paromita. So, a number of things here. One is the word of Paromita, which he says is Sanskrit in its origins. Anybody remember how the Chinese they don't translate, they transliterate. In other words, they render it into the sound of the language rather than try to translate it. Boro what? Baromi, which is parami. So it's actually sound-based rather than meaning. He says Sanskrit means, there's two different ways I've seen this rendered. Is there Sanskritist here tonight? Probably not. So then I can err with no compunctions. It sometimes is parama, and parama can mean the highest, the most excellent. It can mean, therefore, perfection. So if you render it as the base is parama, it means that. The more standard way is to take para and mita and render it as two concepts. The para then means beyond, and that's where the further shore or the further bank or the further boundary. So it means going beyond limitations, going beyond that which holds us, restricts us, limits us. And then mita means that which goes. So paramita, that which goes beyond the furthest shore. So either rendering is talking about a capacity that we have to move beyond our present condition of whatever understanding, insight, limitations we think we have, and moving beyond that. So it's a dynamic term. Paromita, I would take not so much to mean as perfection as perfecting, as moving towards the fullness of our human capacity. That's why sometimes teachers will say, this ordinary mind is the mind that gives rise to the Buddha mind. It's the same substance, but functioning in different ways. In the human capacity, as we go from day to day, it's more or less obstructed or held in or unfulfilled. And this will go back to the next section about klesha. When it's released from that, when it's unbound, untied, liberated, it then opens to this fullness, which is prajna. So that rather than thinking about it as perfection, think about it as a constant improving of one's human capacity. And this means not so much striving for perfection, but really paying attention to imperfection, if I could say that. In other words, the imperfections, the inabilities, the hindrances, self-imposed, that are called klesha, those are what stand in the way of this perfecting. So it's not so much you have to strive for perfection or some ideal as so much as just remove what's preventing that from happening. And that's why they say, really, self-cultivation consists for a long time of becoming the best possible person in every dimension. And by perfecting the human, the sagely or the Buddha accomplishes itself. It is the actual apogee of the human perfected. So in a sense, that's why he says, don't look outside. Look to your human life, look to your human capacity. Work on that. It's because that's the ground where this Mahaprajna Paramita arises. There's also a saying that there may be this heavenly or divine or transcendent path, but you can't get to that except by walking the path right under your feet. And so the idea is by walking the here and now, we're paying attention to the here and now, gradually by perfecting one humanity or trying to perfect one humanity, this naturally just starts to manifest without even trying to have it happen. Because the premise here is this nature, this potential is innate, inherent, whole and complete. And therefore it doesn't have to be sought out outside, but simply released from the bonds or the chains, which is another translation for klesha. So here, he also uses the phrase of the freely flowing water, which is interesting because one way this paramita is used is to say, you go from the shore, this side of confusion, the unawakened, the clinging, the afflicted, crossing over to the other shore. So they use the analogy as if you're crossing from one shore to the other. And the water in between is that which you have to navigate. There's many ways you can interpret this. But he uses that analogy here. But then he goes further. He's almost implying that the water is in fact the water of one's own nature. And he's saying, like waves arise on water, if you cling to sensory states, if you get confused about what's real and true and sort of attached to the whole sensory realm of the six sense organs of the sex, we went over this already, that's what it's referring to. If you get caught up in that, then the pellucid waters of the nature, which are normally calm and still and very clear, this is prajna. The wisdom is also compared to this calm water that reflects everything very perfectly like a mirror. They get stirred up, and so the waters of the mind, if we can use that metaphor, get stirred up by this movement of sensory clinging going out. And then that is what he's saying, there's this shore. So he's not saying so much it's a shore here and someplace else you go to, but you're right within both shores simultaneously now in that water. It's a very interesting way he's using it. And so he says, if you don't attach the sensory states, then you would think he'd say, so the water becomes still, but he doesn't. It's very interesting. What he says is, the water freely flows, and that's what's meant by the other shore. And I find this really interesting because he's taken a standard trope or standard metaphor, which is to say, there's this shore, you could say the troubled shore of samsara, and then there's the other shore, which is the blissful land of nirvana. And you want to get from here to there. But what he seems to be saying is here and there are right here and now. It's not here and there. Here and there are just a state of mind. So unattached, unclinging, unbound, unpolluted in this way, that's this shore, the other shore. And it becomes this shore as soon as the mind moves and turns and attaches to sensory states. So again, it follows his whole approach throughout, which is really interesting. He never claims, he never says that this Buddha nature, this awakened nature, is something outside your human condition, outside the here and now. It's immediately available, immediately accessible. We might be confused, we might cover it over, but that doesn't mean it's gone, it's distant. It only seems distant because we have sort of collapsed our awareness, collapsed our consciousness down through sensory clinging. So this is a very interesting way he plays with this, and therefore he says it's called Paromita. Now the next part we'll go into, come back to then no longer bound by birth and death. And then he says, this is called the other shore. There is no birth and death, just like free flowing water. This has been coming up a lot in the text we've been working on, I would say, in the last couple weeks. And so I've had to really rethink this a lot, or think about it some more, and try to come to this term, because I was mentioning some time ago, when you do the formal ceremony for speaking Dharma, if you're a monk or a nun, you sit on a different platform, and there's a ritual circumambulating 3 times with a stick of incense, and you say, will the Sangha, for the sake of this assembly and all living beings, turn the wonderful Dharma wheel, which means teach the Dharma, so that all living beings might leave suffering and end birth and death. And in Chinese, it's Lao Sheng Tosa. And so I'm doing this for a number of years, and I heard that phrase, and finally I asked everybody, what does that mean? Lao Sheng Tosa, what does it mean to end birth and death? And there was a long pause and silence in the audience. And I was asking too, because I had been repeating it. It had become sort of what I call a mutterance, not an utterance, but a mutter. And we say it over and over again, but never stop to think, well, what does it mean? And the reason I asked that is because many times, like my own parents would ask, well, I read this in the text, this ending of birth and death. That sounds awfully sad. It sounds awfully depressing. And I thought, yeah, I guess it does. Ending birth and death, that sounds rather final. And I had to sort of think about it and say, well, but there's nothing in these teachings that talk about this depressing ending state. When you read about the text, he talks about this wonderful virtues of nirvana, purity, permanence, true self, bliss. You talk about the 4 unlimited minds that come with this. Your kindness has no limit. Your compassion has no limit. Joy has no limit. There's a joy that goes beyond rushes that come from getting and whatnot. And and equanimity. There's a calm, alert calmness that comes. So all the virtues of nirvana are just superlative. And then you have to say, no birth and death. And so there's a problem with the language, I think, between the concept of no birth and death and then saying that this is another way of talking about nirvana. So it brings up the question then, what is nirvana? What I like about what he did here, I don't know what nirvana is, by the way. I'm not going to even attempt. But I might say something about what I think it isn't. And I think maybe that would help clear some space. he uses here like freely flowing water. Now, if you take that to say there's no birth and death, just like freely flowing water, that's different than ice. It's different than inertness. It's different than a black hole. If you think about the ending of birth and death, sometimes the image that comes to mind is no more. Just the lights go out and there's just the void. But he uses this term, freely flowing water. Now, freely flowing water, at least where I go in Maine, they're waiting right now and they're making bets at all the local stores about when the ice goes out. They're hibernated in Maine right now. Everything's frozen, and they're looking forward. They're really looking forward to when the ice goes out. And that means on this day, suddenly the lakes open up and the water starts flowing again. And it happens very dramatically. It happens usually within a couple hours. And so they make bets. You go to the general store, you go to the restaurants, you put your date down, your time, when you think it's going to be, and there's a big lottery. And you win a big prize if you win that. And it's this huge celebration when the water flows again. So if you thought nirvana was a still extinct state, that would be the winter hibernation. But instead, it's when everything comes to life and moves again, that flows again, and spring comes. And so I have to imagine, by him using this like freely flowing water, he's talking about nirvana not as a still extinct void, but as a vibrant, moving, unattached, unbound spring. Okay, so I'm just saying the language helps us to think there's something here that are saying no birth and death does not the joy and liberation that's meant by that term. So that's the first clue. We also, I think it's really important to get at this because otherwise it could seem like the ultimate or the highest goal in this is to end existence. And in fact, I told you before, many of the early interpreters of these texts, Western European, Western scholars, came across this term nirvana, which literally means to blow out, to blow out the flame. And they then translated it as extinction. And of course, that has a very positive connotation. It's what you see in the museums of, archaeology. Dodo birds are extinct, there's dinosaurs that are extinct, and then you want to be extinct. And they were trying to think, well, that's the highest goal of the Buddhist quest, is for this extinction. No more birth. And then all suffering ends. Which in a sense makes sense, because if you're extinct, you don't suffer, I suppose. Really, if you think about it. And then I told you finally one scholar figured out, or asked himself the question, why are these millions and millions of people who call themselves devoted Buddhists and seem to be happily engaged in their lives, how could they possibly think that suicide or nihilism is the end, the ultimate goal? It didn't make sense to him. In fact, they weren't tending towards that. They were tending to a fullness and joy and so on and so forth. And so he finally figured out that maybe they had translated it wrong and that extinction wasn't a good term. The other thing I ran across, though, is the early Western interpreters, some of them decided, no, it couldn't mean that. And the solution is in rebirth. So the happiness of Buddhism is in reincarnation or rebirth. And by that they meant, and this is someone, there's an American called Ernest Fenollosa who early went over to Japan and was very interested in Buddhism, and another man named Paul Karras. And at that time, the thing that was in people's consciousness most pressing was mortality. This was at the turn of the century. And mortality and death was a troubling issue. It always, of course, has been, but more so then. In their minds, at least, they were really worried about this. This is where the beginning of spiritualism starts, especially in the United States, where people have seances and try to connect with the ghosts and spirits of the departed because they were so afraid that there wasn't anything beyond the grave. And so therefore, this effort, William James got involved in this, Madame Blavatsky got involved in this, and so forth. And people would go on the weekends, instead of coming here, you'd go to a house and something and have a seance and try to talk to and bring in the spirits of the dead. Arthur Conan Doyle got into this, the inventor of Sherlock Holmes. So this was very popular at the time. So strong was the fear that there wasn't anything, because the literalness of the scriptures at that time were being questioned by Darwinian science and so forth, and they wondered, is there mortality? Is that the end, or is there something beyond the grave? And even the notion of beyond the grave or the other world was a way to affirm that there must be. The actual language of this presumed that that was it, and how do we get in touch with it? So anyhow, when they came across Buddhism, they thought, aha, reincarnation. Oh, whew, what a relief. That means we can come back again and again and again. And hopefully we can come back to right where we were, or, if you didn't like where you were, to someplace else. And so they imagined that the rebirth, reincarnation in Buddhism was a kind of guaranteed immortality, that you could come back again and again. And of course it came as quite a shock that when they actually made contact with Buddhist monks and nuns, they explained, well, that isn't exactly what it meant. So then they wondered what this thing is of no birth and death. And I don't think it's resolved in a lot of people's minds, even people who have been Buddhist for a long time. It's not clear, at least my experience of asking them. I asked one person, they said, well, it's not really death. It's just the death of the body. Your body dies, but then you're free. And I thought, oh, but that's not Buddhist. You know, there is a notion that, going back to Plato, that this body, this mortal coil, is just a prisoner cave, like a dark spot that holds your immortal soul. And if you can get rid of the body, your immortal soul, like a bird outside the cage, will go, and it'll be free. And so the idea was that the immortal soul encaged within the body, if the body were mortified or put down, then the soul would fly away and you'd be free. That isn't Buddhist either. So what does birth and death ending mean? Well, that's what we need to look into more. He's going to say a lot about it here. But I just wanted to bring it up tonight because it seems like a clunk. You know, it's like, Bodhis, your nature, it's pure, there's a bliss of nirvana and so forth, and you end birth and death. And you go, whoa, how do I reconcile those two concepts? So I'm suspecting or suggesting part of the problem is translation. Part of the problem is translation. I think we really have to look at this particular phrase. Liao doesn't necessarily mean ending. It means coming to terms with, resolving. That's a different meaning than ending. So it means, you could mean something to the extent that you do not end existence, but you end the problem of an unexamined, unawakened existence. Now, that's not a retranslation, but I'm saying the terms themselves suggest something other than an ending of being. It sounds like it's ending of some kind of meaningless being, a being wrapped up in unsatisfactory, dissatisfactory, incompleteness, which is the term for dukkha. So dukkha is, in fact, referenced as nirvana, opposite. Okay? So where I'm getting at here is the term nirvana doesn't mean an end of existence. It means the end of a problematic or unfulfilled existence. And that could be attained or achieved here and now. And that's what he says. He says here and now. He doesn't say, this is where you go to when you die. He's saying this is something you experience and enter into by letting go of attachments and confused thinking here and now. And so it's almost like, let's go on and we'll read, because he's got this expression where he says the afflictions are bodhi, are awakening. So it's another term. We'll come back to the birth and death. Okay? We won't end it. Good and wise friends, confused people recite with their mouths, yet right while they recite, they live in falsity and error. To cultivate in every moment of thought, that is the true nature. Understand this Dharma. It is prajna Dharma, meaning wisdom Dharma. In fact, my teacher really said he wanted to change the name of Buddhism and say it's just the teaching of wisdom, it's the teaching of the human mind rather than Buddhism. And here he's saying the same thing. It's wisdom teaching. Dharma just means teaching. And cultivate this practice. This is living the life of prajna. If you fail to cultivate in this way, you'll be just an ordinary person. But the moment you put it into practice, you yourself are equal to the Buddhas. So again, note here what I think the powerfully dynamic language of this passage. He's saying you can recite it, you can talk about it, you can chant it, but the real thing counts whether you're doing this within your own life. Now, so when he says don't seek outside, seek within, he doesn't mean within sort of in a contemplative, contemplating your navel zone. That's not what he's talking about. Within means within your human experience, within your human experience. You mean your, not mine. You know, you wouldn't want to be in mine anyhow, but even if you tried to, that's not where he's going. Nor should I be attending to your experience and saying, well, you know, you got this fault and that, blah, blah, blah. He's within your now, here and now human experience. Because wherever you're tied up, wherever you're afflicted, wherever you're unclear, that's exactly the ice that you need to melt that becomes the flowing water of Bodhi, not someplace else. So when he says look within, he means within the human, within the ordinary, within the here and now, and then most importantly, within your own being and your own life, your own relationships. Because often people would come to the Master and say, oh, Master, I want to leave home, become a monk or nun. And sometimes people say, oh, that's great, that's wonderful. And he'd say, not so fast, not so fast. Are you going forth or are you leaving something behind? Huh? He says, if you're going forth freely and, to really resolve this great issue of what it means to be so and so forth, that's okay, but are you running away from something? Well, my family's kind of a mess, and I got a lot of debts and whatnot, and I thought if I leave home, I could leave it all behind. And he'd say, no, that's not truly going forth. You need to attend to that first before you can be free in your conscience and your karma to cultivate the way. Because even though you physically leave it, those responsibilities, those debts, those unfinished relationships in your family will obstruct you, and they'll obstruct your family. So he would often say, first you need to be a Buddha at home, then you can be the Buddha left home. Now, he didn't say that to everybody. It depended on the situation. If somebody had a good family situation, he didn't say, okay, play it out. He would say, okay, that's a good basis. But the motivation, the attention was everything. So here he's saying, if in fact your inner life is not together, then substituting coming to terms with that directly by engaging yourself in just memorization and recitation and devotions will produce no fruit. It's a kind of escapism. Now, I'm not saying that devotions and rituals, don't get me wrong, are escapism. It's depending how you use it. Used in the right way, devotions, rituals, recitation, memorization can be a powerful tool for realization and awakening. But used as an escape, not only do they don't lead anywhere, but they keep you from actually dealing with the ground of awakening that you're already on. And so that's the double whammy. You don't get the benefits, and yet the time is wasted in not dealing with your own existence. So that's very tricky how you use this. That's why he says it's most important that in every moment of thought you cultivate. Right within your mind, that is the true nature. So the true nature is not something out there that you attain. The true nature is the unraveling of your own mind and nature from the kinks. Understand this Dharma. It is the Prajna Dharma. He's saying understand what the Dharma is. Dharma is something you do. I don't want to go a Nike ad here, just do it. But that's basically, if you saw the Buddha, you have a little Nike thing, just do it. I know, the swastika is there, the reverse swastika, by the way. But the Nike thing would be pretty good today, so like, do it. Don't talk about it, don't dream about it, don't fantasize about it, don't think in the future I might do it, or next life when I have better conditions I do it. You do it now. You don't think, my teacher used to say, you think about, maybe sometime in the future I'll eat. No, you eat when you're hungry now. Sometime in the future I might sleep. No, you sleep now. Oh, if it's cold, you're going to put on clothes tomorrow? No, you put them on now. He says, well, what are you waiting for then? Why would you cultivate in some future point? Oh, I don't have enough merit and virtue. He says, well, sitting around like that, you'll never increase it. Well, how will I increase it? Clean up your mind. Huh? Oh, me? And so this is called the direct teaching. You go to your own mind. So he's saying this is Dharma is something you do. It's not something you just believe in. When you say, I take refuge with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, he's going to do this actually in one of the chapters. He's going to explain how you do that within your own nature. But he's saying the Dharma is the teaching of doing cultivation. And they say when you give the gift of Dharma, the highest gift of Dharma is cultivating according to the teachings. It's not like you make a Dharma present and give it and say, here's a Dharma book, here's a Dharma icon, here's a Dharma passage, and it's written in gold. He's saying the highest gift of Dharma is not even necessarily speaking, teaching it. It's cultivating according to it. Wow, that's pretty powerful. If you fail to cultivate this way, you will be an ordinary person. So he's saying the difference between the sagely and the ordinary is nothing more than you do it or you don't. It's that simple. It's not something you're born into. Buddhas are not sort of transcendentally issuing forth from the heavens. They're coming from the same condition. And that's why the image of diamond is used. We're reading now a text called the Diamond Sutra, the Vajra Sutra. And the diamond is this adamantine substance that can cut through all doubts, all confusion. But it also is a beautiful image because the diamond comes from South Africa. No, where does a diamond come from? Coal. Right. Yeah, I've got a lot of coal, but I don't have a lot of diamonds. So coal, basically coal, when pressured, intense heat and pressure over time becomes a diamond. Interesting. Okay? So diamonds come from this dark, ugly, yucky substance, right? But pressured over time, as the same way of cultivating over time your person, you go from coal to diamond. You go from afflictions to bodhi. So he uses ice and water. So I'm adding coal and diamond. I think it works, okay? But we'll see. So, next passage, then he goes. And this is a very strong line. I've read this line to a number, let me say this, a number of people have read this text many times, and when we were translating this last time, we did, and somebody says, that wasn't in there. Yeah, it was. No, I don't remember that. This line was not in there. Okay, and here's the line. Good and wise friends, ordinary people themselves are Buddhas, and the afflictions themselves, or affliction itself, is bodhi. In one moment of confused thought, you're just an ordinary person. If the very next thought is awakened, you are a Buddha. Previous thoughts clinging to sensory states are afflictions, and succeeding thoughts unattached to states is bodhi. Again, look at what he's doing. He's taking Buddha and ordinary and saying they're a single substance just in different modes of functioning. And in fact, there's a passage he said to his assembly. He says, why don't you all, right now, in this very time and place, awaken to your true nature? And it wasn't a rhetorical question. He said this to the assembly. And if you think about it, what he was saying there, it wasn't like, ha-ha, because you can't. No, he was saying, what's stopping you? And what he meant by that is, it's not what's stopping you is in the past. Oh, my karma's so heavy, it's in the past, it has changed me down. Or what's stopping you is, it's not the future time yet, right? When the Buddha comes in the world and I walk into the Jeta Grove and I go, whoa, yo, Buddha, and I have awakening. And because the Buddha's not here now, it's not going to happen. He's saying right now, what's stopping you? And he doesn't mean, oh, you could become a Buddha just right now. He does, but he doesn't. I mean, he does, yes, theoretically. But what he's saying is what's stopping you right now means here and now, your thought processes as they're working are either going thought to thought awakened or thought to thought confused. In the dynamic here and now, this flow of consciousness that we're in right now is either going this direction or that direction. And often it's going like this. But he's saying that dynamic is where it's happening. That's the point of turning. It's right in the here and now, not in the past and not in the future. It's the only mechanism, if you think about it, we have any kind of control over, as much as we have control. We cannot control the past, okay? And we can rewrite it, we can revise it, we can reimagine it, but we're not going to change it. And we can't really change the future because it hasn't yet come. And it's often quite not what we expected when it does come, despite our plans. The only mechanism we have is the existential here and now. That's the only point where we have a little bit of power over our destiny. And that point, what's the point of meditation? It's to attend to that mechanism in the here and now and try to glimpse it as it's going in this very, very rapid fire. Confused, awakened, diamond, coal, water, ice, boom, 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 boom. So when he says, why don't you right now, here and now, he's not saying so much, how come you can't do it immediately? He's saying, directly attend to the point of being in your human existence at this moment. That's the only place that Buddhas come from. And it's also where confused beings come from. That's that point. He calls this, if you can, in that place of turning. We'll have a verse later. It's a beautiful expression. He says, if in the place of turning you can remain unconfused, then forever you dwell in this awakened state. So it's dynamic, it's happening, it's not attaining, it's maintaining. So when he says the afflictions themselves are bodhi, he's basically rephrasing the thing we were talking about before. And at the footnote down here on the afflictions, in Chinese it's fanao. On the text you'll see it. Sanskrit it's klesha. And the definition, it's really interesting. These are inclinations and tendencies, often lying deep in the mind, that cause mental, emotional, and physical distress and agitation. They hinder practice and obstruct our awakening. And they're rendered, and here's really interesting, under a wide range of names. Sometimes they're called the afflictions, sometimes defilements. And by defilements, it means pollution, okay? And it means not an innate defilement, okay? I want to be really clear. This is not positing an innate depravity or innate defilement of human nature. It is something that's happening. I gave you once the example, a boat sails up to the East Coast. It's in the early late 1600s. And they look out and they see this incredible body of land, two green pieces of land coming into the sea with these streams running down. And they land on there and they bend over and they drink the water out of the creek and say, oh my gosh, we're drinking water again, because we just came from Europe and we had to drink beer all the time because the water was so bad, all we drink was beer. Even kids drank beer, okay? Sorry. Why? Because they wanted to live. You drink water, you're dead. So they drank that and they saw it and they breathed the air and everything was so clean. They said, oh my gosh, paradise. Paradise. And they actually gave words for this when they called it. This was New Eden, New Brunswick. This one was New York. That was the first description of New York. Now you can do that today, right? You pull up your boat along the shore, get out and slip the water running. No. So what happened? That paradise became polluted. Okay? So what defilements mean here is not an innate defilement, but a misuse of our nature to the point where it becomes polluted. Heng Shui has a great story that I've told you about before in his native place, Ohio. You ever hear of that? It's right near Wisconsin, which is the kind of the jewel of the states. Anyhow, in Ohio, where he came from, there was this river. What was the name of the river? I'm trying to think. It's got a funny name. I'll think of it. It's a very famous river in Ohio. And when they first came there, the Indian stories of the river say it was just a horn of plenty, filled with fish and drinking beautiful water and so on and so forth. But after a while, Ohio being an industrial state and all the industries were set up and so forth, the river became progressively less pure and more polluted. And Heng Shui said the joy the fun in the summer is when they heard the fire trucks, you know. If you're a kid, the fun thing is hop on your bike and then go follow the fire trucks to see where the fire is. And they would follow the fire trucks going down to the river, because the river was on fire. Yeah, and so the river was on fire because the pollution and the slicks and the oil and everything would get to a point where they would actually catch on fire. So he said it was this wonderful scene, the firemen shooting from their hoses onto the river to put the fire out. And of course, they didn't swim in that river. Mother said, absolutely don't go in this river. And so when it got that bad, finally the state of Ohio put a blue ribbon panel together to say, how can we clean up this river? And they thought, well, maybe we'll get in touch with DuPont Chemical or something, and we'll come up with all these chemicals that we can put in to clean it out. And they're going through a number of processes like this, and finally someone said, you know what? What if we just stop polluting? What if we passed these laws that restricted the dumping and the chemicals and whatnot and got really strict on this? And people said, oh, that wouldn't work. I mean, you got all that pollution in there. That's, well, it was the cheapest solution, it turned out, than trying to come up with some rare chemical that they could do. And so they went ahead with it. And within 10 years, Hung Sure and his buddies were back swimming in the river. In other words, by simply stopping adding the pollutants, the river cleansed itself through the seasons and through the turns. And so it's a kind of a metaphor for this idea that the defilements are bodhi. How can the defilements be purity? Simply stop feeding them, feeding yourself these defilements, and your bodhi nature, just like this river, returns. Because it's nature to run clean, to run pure, to run fresh. Anyhow, so that's why sometimes you use defilements. Here, the other language he uses hindrances, yokes, outflows, raging streams, fetters, arrows, jungle, and entanglement. So you choose which one is more graphic for you. Whether you like the liquid or the defilement, or you like the chains and the yokes and the fetters. And hence you have that great Chan statement with the, well, it's not just a great Chan statement. We used to do it with our teacher and say, oh, my teacher, I'm just totally tied up and afflicted. I just can't get out. I'm just wrapped up in knots. And he'd say, who's tying you up? This is the yokes, the chains, and the fetters. By asking us that, we had to say, I must have tied myself up. And he said, right. So why are you asking me to untie you? Untie yourself. Oh, but it's really hard, Master. Well, it wasn't hard tying them. Why would it be hard untying them? Do you perhaps like them? Do you like your knots and chains and fetters and you don't want to give them up? This kind of play is working on that sense of the nature. So now this last line is really good. He says, previous thoughts clinging to sensory states is afflictions. He doesn't say afflictions is hard and fast. He's saying afflictions is fluid. If you're clinging to these states, for example, you get cut off in traffic, someone hangs up on you. Your call means so much to us. Please stay on the line. Yeah. They don't really mean it. They don't respect me. Blah, 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 blah. And then you cling to that thought. That's afflictions. Okay, they hang up, you have the first rush of it and go, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. Okay? You don't go there, that's bodhi. You go there and you cling to it, that's afflictions. And so he says, the previous, clinging to these thoughts, that's afflictions. Succeeding thoughts unattached, that's bodhi. It's happening just like that. And in fact, there is a passage where the teacher holds out his hand like this and says, was that quick? And the disciple says, that was quick. He says, afflictions and bodhi are that quick. It's just one thought that makes a difference. But it's not just one thought and you got bodhi and it's like, wow, done. It's thought after thought. Thought after thought. How many thoughts did you have tonight in the 45 minutes? Just one. You went, afflictions, bodhi, right? No, afflictions, bodhi, right? Like a stroboscope. There's like a disco in here. No, seriously, everything's calm, the candles are burning, yeah, but if you took the mind and plugged it into a stroboscope, one of those lights they do in a disco, I've heard, I've never been there, but they have these things, and it just whips around. If we plugged everybody's mind in, that's what we'd be seeing in here.
Hey, Martin.
Yes?
Is he also saying that without the afflictions there is no Bodhi, or that like the two need each other, that to basically somehow address your afflictions or turn that switch, as it were, you were just saying, from affliction to Bodhi. That is the flowing of the water. That it's not just saying, well, that's my affliction, I'm not going to pay attention to that.
No, right. So clean up a fatalism that says, oh God, what can you do? It's just like, it's so heavy. I just might as well just go with this. That's affliction on top of affliction, he would say. And the Bodhi comes when you address it. And it seems to take a great deal of courage, but actually it's pretty simple. We make our Bodhi into these big boogeymen. You know, it's like, oh my God, my afflictions. But you really narrow it down, there's actually nothing there. And my teacher would say it's actually empty. And only because you give it a little bit of attachment does it seem to be bigger and bigger. But it also means that they become, one transforms back. So it's sort of like you've taken your wisdom and you've turned it into this distorted shape. When you straighten that out again, or when the ice turns to the water, it flows again. And this is a really important point. I don't know if you're asking this, but the implication of what you're asking is, there's often a phrase in here that says, cut off afflictions. Duan fan now. And the Sixth Patriarch and my teacher both say you can't do that, because if you cut off the afflictions, you cut off Bodhi. Yeah. So you don't smash them, you don't cut them off. Yeah. You transform them. Because to cut them off would lead to a duality, right? And so it's really interesting. You can't cut them off. You have to transform. That's when I was mentioning when I began to practice with him, I had a sort of macho Kung Fu attitude towards cultivation. And it was like, well, I can break boards and bricks, I can break my afflictions too, you know. Because I saw those Kung Fu movies with the bald-headed monks, and I thought I can do that, you know, I'll smash through. And I thought I'd impress him and say, Master, I have lots of afflictions, but I'm going to smash them and break them. And he just sat there very loosely and looked at me, and he's just shaking his head, and he said, no, don't smash them, don't hurt them. They're living beings. Well, they're not living beings, they're deep. No, they're your living beings, and you need to cross them over. Well, and he says, if you smash them, you'll hurt them. And if you hurt them, they won't cross over, and they'll afflict you even more. I said, well, what should I do? He said, don't smash them, don't break them. Let them melt. Let them slowly melt like ice under a warm sun. And I said, well, where am I going to get the warm sun? He says, that's called wisdom. Let the sun of wisdom and kindness and compassion melt your afflictions into fluid water. He said, but don't smash them. And from that I learned it wasn't just a psychophysical sense of I was on the wrong thing. I was really coming at it hard nose. But the very principle is wrong. Because you don't smash them, you transform them. In effect, you could say that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas just mutated by your misunderstanding. You mistreated them. And if you treat them well, they just naturally return to their enlightened state. So I don't know if that was the implication, but it's a good one. So let me just read you one thing here, and then we'll close for tonight. And back to this thing of birth and death. We won't end it tonight, neither that or the discussion of it. But that being said, I think it's worthwhile to look into, because later he'll talk about this some more, and I think we need to really rethink what we mean by the ending of birth and death. One thing, I'll give you an example. We just used this week. There's a very famous discourse called The Poison Arrow. I don't know if you've heard about that discourse. What's it called? Malunkya. There was a disciple of the Buddha called Malunkya who came to study with the Buddha. And one day while he was sitting in meditation, he started to think, is there a beginning to the universe and an end? Does the Buddha exist after death or not? He started to entertain these really speculative metaphysical questions. And then he said, and the Buddha never told me the answers to these questions. You know what? If he doesn't tell me the answer to these questions, I'm going to leave and go someplace else. And he got really worked up about this. And then he went to the Buddha and he said, I got all these questions. And the Buddha said, He He says, first of all, Malunkia, did I ever tell you that if you come and study with me, we're going to deal with all these questions? He said, no. So it was a contract question first. So I didn't break the contract, right? No. And then he was like, Malunkia is thinking, but if he knows and doesn't tell me, he's holding back. If he doesn't know, then he's not a good teacher. So either way, you got this. And then the Buddha said, Malunkia, let me give you an analogy. He says, suppose someone were hit by an arrow, a poisonous arrow, and it's stuck in their arm. Now, would they, before they went to get immediate medical attention to get the arrow out, ask themselves, I wonder who shot that? Where did that come from? Did it come from up in the mountain or from a tree? And was it an enemy or an accident? And what is this arrow made of? Is it made of balsa or is it made of hardwood? How long is the arrow exactly? And what are the feathers? Is it from a quail or from an eagle? And what tip? Was it stone or metal? And blah, blah, blah. And he said, do you think, Malunkia, that the person who had that arrow shot into them only would go for medical attention once they answered all those questions? And Malunkia said, no. He said, well, what would happen? They'd die. Because even if they could answer those questions, probably you couldn't. It would take so long that the poison... He says, in the same way, Malunkia, the questions you are asking are leading nowhere. Even if you answer them, they don't deal with the existential matter of birth, aging, sickness, death, of the unsatisfactoriness of your existential condition here and now. He says, that's all I teach. I don't declare about these other things. I only teach the end of suffering and how to get there. Because that's really all that matters. Whether there's an answer to these questions or not, fine. But pay attention to this most importantly first, because you have such a short span of life. Attend to the most important things. And so he says, I only declare what leads to the end of suffering, to the unbinding, to the liberation, to the fullness. I don't declare about these things. So that being said, I'm suggesting perhaps the way to look at ending birth and death is to call it the ending of the suffering, rather than the ending of life. And to support that, and at least you think I didn't come up with this alone, I'm going to quote you a passage. This is from Udana, which is an early text. And the Buddha says, they asked the Buddha, what is this thing? Tell us what nirvana is, and we want to get it. It was sort of like, what do we want nirvana? When do we want it? Now. And so they're all there. And the Buddha says, your very wanting in nirvana is samsara. And so he says, however, there is a sphere or a realm, a state, which is neither earth, nor fire, nor water, nor air, which is not the sphere or realm of infinity of space, nor the sphere of infinity of consciousness, nor the sphere of nothingness, nor the sphere of perception or even non-perception. Nor is it this world, nor an other world. Nor is it sun or moon. So he says, there is a sphere, there is a realm, but it's not any of these things. It's not earth, air, fire, water. I mean, it's not the material, nor he says this is just consciousness. And if you say, does it really exist, or is it a figment of my imagination? He might say, yes. Okay? But he says it's neither of those. I deny, and this is very interesting, I deny that it's either coming or going. Coming into being or going out. I deny that it's enduring. I deny that it's death or birth. Now here he's just saying the end of birth and death, he's denying that's the end, it's not death and not birth. It is only the end of suffering. That's the last line. It is only the end of suffering. So whatever this nirvana is, or whatever this ending of birth and death is, it's not what we think. It's either some kind of eternal blissful thing, or it's the absolute end of a void. It's simply the end of suffering. So then you would have to imagine, what would a life be with no dissatisfaction, no craving, no suffering? And that would probably be then nirvana. So just as he said something like, how does he put it? Awakened the living beings of Buddha, confused the Buddha as a living being. You could almost say something to the effect of, awakened birth and death is nirvana. unawakened birth and death is samsara. Now, I'm posing that. I'm sticking my neck out a little bit. But it makes sense in terms of, if you say there is no coming or going, there is no eternalism or nihilism, then it has to do with a state of liberated consciousness that in the midst of coming and going doesn't attach to anything and therefore doesn't have an end or beginning. So awakened, this shore and the other shore, for the bodhisattva is one and the same. Unawakened, it's a source of samsara. So I'm not completely conjecturing here because there's text to support this idea. The one I quoted you last week says, the bodhisattva, because of great wisdom, does not hang out and dwell in samsara. But because of great compassion, hang out and dwell in nirvana. So where does he dwell? And the text goes on, he says, he's like a ferry boat captain who's constantly crossing over from one shore to the other. He doesn't stay on this shore, he doesn't stay on that shore, nor does he stop any place in the middle. But he's going and returning, crossing over constantly between wisdom, compassion, and that is nirvana. So it's not an end, and yet it's not a dwelling. That's pretty trippy stuff, I think. Anyhow, we'll stop there for tonight. Thoroughly perplexed, perhaps, but if we keep coming back, the Sixth Patriarch will go into this again and again. Is there an announcement?
So one of the monks here, Dharma Master Jingfo, wanted to make an announcement about an upcoming Amitabha retreat coming up at Berkeley Monastery. It will be happening March 14th and 15th, which is not this weekend, but the following weekend. So people would like to recite Amitabha Buddha's name for 2 whole days. We'll be starting here on Saturday at 8 o'clock with the 8 precept transmission to 9, and actually start the recitation at 9 o'clock. So if people are interested, that's happening on Saturday and Sunday. We have a sign-in sheet here, registration sheet, as well as the sheets. Yeah, there's no sound. The sheets are also online. So, the registration form's also online. So if people are interested, you're welcome to sign up. If you have questions, please feel free to ask any of the people who are staying here in the monastery, or some people are here very familiar with the monastery.
So who are the people that are staying at the monastery? Just raise
Marek
your hand.
in the back. People are probably people
Yeah,
with
raise your
robes
hand,
on,
right.
are a
Otherwise
pretty
you go
strong
talking on,
giveaway.
You live here? No. Do you live here? No. I don't dwell anywhere. Okay.
I don't dwell anywhere, yeah. We dwell nowhere. The robes are a little bit of a giveaway. But I think people probably know that there's also other people who are here quite familiar, like Jason over here, Fedor over there, Franklin back there, anybody who's on the women's side as well. A lot of people have come to that kind of retreat. So if you're interested, please feel free to ask somebody who's been here before. Okay. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else. Marek? Oh, the Buddhism for the Modern Mind is this Monday. Do you know what the topic is? Anybody? No? Okay. You can check online for the topic.
Aesthetics.
Erotic aesthetics or spiritual aesthetics?
Oh boy, I don't know about to say that online. Okay. Everybody heard it from Feta. Okay, sounds good.
Did you say you're giving away robes or robes were a giveaway? I couldn't.
No, I said the robes are a giveaway. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll transfer in English.
Okay. Sorry? Yeah. Calligraphy this Saturday? Okay, so there's going to be calligraphy this Saturday at 3:30? 3 o'clock. So people who want to learn Chinese calligraphy, 3 o'clock, that's a good time to come.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the three jewels.